Um, so Jennifer, like usual, has done a fantastic job of putting resources together and getting us all ready to go. So hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at the resources she put together to get students to actually do their work, which kind of fits well. How many of you did your work for today? Did you prepare for today? And then we expect our students to, right? So all fun. I get it. It's always a challenge, and I appreciate. Hey, good for you, Ava. Awesome. I love the thumbs up. Thank you. Um, but Jennifer's put together some great resources on how to get our students to actually do the pre-work for classes, and I'm excited to kind of get things started. So thanks for all the work, Jennifer, and I'll turn it over to you to take it from there.
Yeah, excuse me. So we kind of pulled from some topics that, or some pedagogy methodology that we've discussed before in pulling make it stick and that retrieval practice back in, because that could be some of those tactics could be good ways to motivate students to prepare for class, like the entry quiz, uh, or the so they have to, or like think, pair, share when they first come in to the classroom, a round of reading that they were assigned or whatnot. And then their flipped classrooms gives us a lot of other ideas too on ways that we can encourage students to do their pre-work. And then I found a really interesting and I thought relevant article around nursing students motivation specifically, and what was discovered as best practices for that population, which is very fitting for NMC. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to bring to our attention, and really looking forward to hearing what you guys might have tried in your classrooms and how they've worked. So.
Does anybody come ready with some questions for us or questions for the group?
Me? Or?
No,
Okay.
Nope. Just throwing it out to the group to see what questions they have. So everybody's students are all coming to class prepared. That's awesome to see. I'm so glad to see that. By the laughs, I can tell not. So what are the challenges you're running into? What things can we
That was provocative, Mark. I think that it's really, really hard to get them some pre-work for the class in the science, because they complain all the time that actually they don't understand what they read, or they what have to read or prepare themselves for the class. So, and partially I understand. So my solution also was partial to the problem that should they focus, or what kind of questions should they answer after the first reading, at least some basic understanding of the material. Just I don't have to time to explain a couple of basic facts, what is readable and understandable after a reading. So that's my solution for this problem, but again, it's just partially.
This is Lane. I also would have the students answer some questions before coming to class. Interestingly, I just had a student tell me that study guides don't work for her. So I'm a little nervous about her coming into my neuro class in the fall, because I use study guides a lot. But I was struck by something I read in one of the articles, or about decreasing the length of pre-class assignments. And I think I need to do that, because I tend to want them to know, probably more than they have to know about the different neurologic diagnoses. So I think that's a good challenge for me this summer, is to really kind of hone in on what do they really need to know. And then I was also thinking about maybe restructuring so that we so that we work on treatment techniques first and then kind of backpedal and talk about the diagnoses and the problems that we see. Because I thought maybe that would be more interesting after they had done some treatment. Because I know they really just want to get to the treatment. I feel like in my neuro class, especially, I spend so long trying to introduce them to the diagnoses that they lose interest or they get overwhelmed by the amount of material that I'm trying to help them cover. So, so just some food for thought. So thanks.
Hi, it's Ashley. I found it interesting in one of the articles that they said for assignments, instead of grading on how well you do on the assignment, they did it as a pass-fail. So if you do the assignment, you put the effort in, you get a pass, which is kind of how I've done it, where I don't want them to be afraid to get it wrong. There's resources online. I'm okay with them using the resources, but it's more about, are you learning the material and does it make sense? If you have questions, don't be scared to go ask your classmates, ask me, like, because I'd rather them understand the material, and they've done a really good job with getting all of their assignments done, doing them well, because they like to be able to, they actually told me they like those kind of assignments. And then I've also been doing quizzes at the end of class, but based on the reading for that day's class. And they told me they liked that too, because they were like, well, if I read wrong, you clarify it, and then we do a quiz on it. So if I read beforehand, then you clarify. I do better on the quiz, and I don't do as well if I didn't read beforehand. So it's interesting that it kind of, all the material kind of like said that that was good stuff that I was doing.
Awesome. Keep up the great work.
What kind
Yeah,
of,
that's a
Ashley,
really
what
good
kind of,
retrieval
what kind of assignments are you talking about here?
We
Ashley,
have
what kind of assignment?
assignments from a workbook that, so it's associated with each chapter. So it's thinking questions and things that are just bringing, what are they reading? How do you like conceptualize that? So they're answering questions based on the reading before they come to class as well.
This is Chris, I like that, and I think, you know, the group of students we're dealing with has been pretty prepared on most of the things that they're doing, which is great. I like what one of the readings brought up too about the idea of retrieval, you know, not just saying, well, go back and reread it when you're studying for the test or whatever, but helping them to retrieve concepts and talking about that in class as they go through and circling back around to it later, you know, kind of when I introduce a new topic, sometimes I'll try to say, oh, okay, and remember this builds on whatever from last semester. And I think, you know, it was nice to see that written up, that retrieval way of doing things kind of helps them to build their knowledge too.
Chris, had you seen that book, Make It Stick?
You know, I was going to ask you about that. I looked at that and saw, you know, the chapter summaries, but I'd love to see the book. Do we happen to have like an electronic copy in our library or?
That one I don't know, but I do have a book, a physical book in my office. So I'm now finished with that book. So let's just make it so that it's open game for anybody that wants it after spring break. I don't
Yeah,
want
you
you
read
reading books and working during spring break, and I've got a few little things to do with it yet before spring break. So I'm going to hold it hostage until after spring break, and then you're welcome to it. So since you asked, Chris, you get first dibs. Is that what you want after you get back from spring break?
you read my mind. I would love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, great. Count on it. Any other thoughts? I'm going to share my screen. There was one article I really liked, so I'm just going to hit share screen and pull that article up real quick. This one was 3 ways to hold students accountable. And we hear a lot of chatter about this, but I think some real good examples that I saw that were kind of handy is the ticket to enter. And we hear it all the time, But I like the concrete idea of come with 3 questions that came out of the reading that you have for us. And that's your ticket to entry, is not go do the homework. But you're not going to be able to generate 3 questions if you didn't do the homework. Other than what's for lunch, that might be a question. But beyond that, I think having that as a ticket to enter, I was trying to think about, okay, how do I do that online? Because a lot of our folks have got online. Go ahead and put your 3 questions in the chat. I want to see them up there, and then we can all discuss those 3 questions from each of us and see what the trends are and see where the muddiest points are and those kinds of things. So I thought that ticket to enter with questions, and it doesn't have to be 3, it can be 1, it can be whatever. But I thought that was a good way to kind of put that together. The other one was choose a side. If you have something that's maybe a choose, a dialogue back and forth or a opposing side, choose a side and tell us what side you're on before you come to class, and that's your ticket to entry. Or the idea of a pass the problem sheet and putting that together. So I thought there were some really good ideas. The students come with a 1-page cheat sheet that is going to help them build that study guide that doesn't work for students, right? Here's a great way to generate and have a student-generated study guide. So I thought those were 3 really good ways. So I love that resource. So thank you, Jennifer. That was great, and I just wanted to share that out with folks.
Yeah, I love that. I've done the 3-question thing sometimes too with guest speakers, because sometimes the students will come and just passively sit with a guest speaker and try to say, okay, you've got to ask at least, 3 questions or have them written down ahead of time in case, somebody's got the same question, but show me that you've got questions and then, get some interaction going.
Great.
Yeah, Chris, I've used that for panel discussions too. When we've had experts coming into the classroom, I wanted the students to be prepared with questions, and that worked really well. But I bombed one time when I asked the students to come with 3 questions about the material that they were covering before class, because then I spent the whole time answering their questions. I mean, I just didn't get past what I wanted to cover more than I had covered that day. And I realized that strategy of just having them ask the questions in class wasn't great. I should have had them turn them in so that I could pick and choose which ones to answer in the moment.
That's a good thought. Yeah.
The other piece of that, though, too, is leverage your students and turn that into the chance to have the dialogue. So if you give yourself the time during that, instead of you're going to answer the questions, ask the students to answer those questions when they come up. Because you'll find that, and I'm sure you've all seen it before, when do you learn the most? When you're teaching or when you're learning? And you learn more when you teach than you ever learn sitting in class. And by being put on the spot to answer those questions, the students get a chance to teach. And so they're going to learn a lot more through that activity too. But again, like you said, Lane, you've got to be ready for that time to be used in class that way, because that can be a time suck too, to where it just pulls everything out of that lecture time.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder about those 3 strategies. I remember reading about the pass the problem sheet, and I liked the idea of having the students come like, okay, write down what you feel like you would need to know to solve this case study in class, right? To work on this case study in class. And I thought that would be a good way to, I don't know, encourage them to work individually before class, because then in class they can work together, right? To solve the problem, so they don't have to feel like, well, I have to depend only on what I have on my sheet of paper to solve this case study. But I thought that would be another way besides just filling out a study guide to help them to prepare for class. I thought that was pretty clever.
For years and years teaching English comp, I've used an assignment called the admit slip. It's a class in writing, and so I want my kids to be writing anyway. more than they typically do. But it also involves a lot of reading. And I think, was it Lane? Somebody said earlier that, you know, to expect less and less reading is probably better. And I have a wonderful reader, and all the readings are just 2 or 3, maybe 4. There's a few longer ones, but something manageable, something that doesn't overwhelm them. But the admit slip asks them to use critical thinking and respond to the reading. And sometimes I have a choice of readings too. And the admit slip means that if that's not in the Dropbox, they can't come in the classroom. And it's the only in-person class I'm teaching right now too. But we could talk about online sort of pre-work too, because but anyway, back to my story here. These first generation students, I don't know if it's just my sections or if it's a trend, but they seem to be so quiet. And so when I have their admit slips, which are short, 200 words, critical thinking, which means analyze something, notice one little detail, anything, bring your own story to bear to this story. I have them in front of me, these documents, and I can randomly just pick one up and start reading. Well, you know, one of the students noted that there was really some strong adjectives used in the introductory section. Let's all read what she said, and you know, it gets the discussion started without them actually speaking. So helps me with that shy class, and also just kind of affirms that the work they did is worth even, you know, bringing out from the front of the room.
So Marlon, that reminds me of the one, how to get students to do prep work, translating theory into practice. One of the second point on his list is promoting intrinsic motivation by highlighting competency. So when you do that activity and you're the example that you just gave, you're acknowledging that student's competency of like the strong adjectives in the first paragraph or whatnot. And so I think that's really that's inspiring. So because then they feel heard and seen and that they're on the right track.
Any other thoughts out there? Well, it looks like you had something for us, Marlon. It's kind of interesting. This was a discussion that Sonia and I were having earlier today, was just right before this session even, was we need to meet people where they're at too. So using TikTok as an example, how do we get a 30-second solution? So which are you going to be more likely to watch as a faculty member? Our 6-minute video on grading in Brightspace, or a 30-second video on my students can't see their grades? Which one are you going to tend to look toward? Give me that 30-second quick answer to exactly what I'm looking for, right? Exactly. But that's an awful lot of effort for a faculty member to put forward. So take those questions that you're asking as an entrance ticket, and now as students, as an exit ticket, you have to pick one of those questions to then answer. And we want a 30-second TikTok style video of the answer to that question. And Lane, that might take some time off of that schedule you were looking at, saying, hey, we ate my entire class now covering those questions. Instead, you could say, here's the assignment, go build that, and you're going to take one of my questions that came in today as your exit ticket, and your entry ticket for the next class will be your 30-second TikTok style video to answer those questions. Now you have an entire library created by students that could create a video study guide. So I'm all for finding ways to leverage students to do your work for you. And having that library, we did that a lot in some physics classes I worked in, that students were always saying, hey, this, where does it fit in the real world? Which we don't have the problem in nursing so much, but assigning it then as a student to go show me where the Pythagorean theorem fits in real world. Why do you need to know it? And what's it going to help with? And they would come up with all kinds of creative ideas of how to showcase that theory in the real life. And they were high school students doing this years ago. So video now is a whole lot easier to do something like that. And the instructor then had a whole library for next year to pull from to show and answer those questions. And they used them in lectures, but they also just put them out there for students to be able to browse and see, what did they do for this? So look for ways to have your students do that for you too, to get that time back out of your class and provide some incredible resources to your students.
That seems like a good idea, Mark. I was thinking about, if I ask them what their muddiest point is toward the end of lecture, instead of having a discussion about it there, we could put it on them to go and search for an answer to that question.
And now when you come back to that third class, or the second class, I guess, the next class down the road, you could have taken a look at the different answers to find the best answer. And then that gives them that pride that you were talking about, Jennifer, of, hey, I got my answer selected this time. And that's going to be motivation for students to be up front next time. Okay, so I see Ava's question. I finally taken a look at the chat here. What if they didn't do their homework? How can you proceed in class if you know they did not read the required text? We get a lot of practice with that in this session. We get to recap the pieces and make sure that people see all the different resources that are out there. So we get a lot of practice at that. But a lot of it is really calling folks out now and then. And if they know that you're going to go through the lecture in your PowerPoint slides for that day, and they're going to get all the information they need out of your lecture, why would I read that? Where if I know that I might get called out to answer a question, and I need to be a little more prepared because holy cow, I got called out today and it didn't feel very good. And I know that's rough sometimes, but sometimes students have to know they're going to be expected to do something with that assignment. Any other thoughts from other folks or strategies they use for that? How do you proceed?
A lot of times I do assume that they have not done the complete reading, and then I just plan for that, and then it does realize itself in unfamiliarity with the basic principles or the main exciting paragraph or something, and then I'll just ask them in class to read that aloud for everybody to hear. I mean, a lot of them haven't read it anyway. and then it's short, it's manageable for discussion, and it's focused and it's important, or I wouldn't be calling attention to it anyway. So that's putting them on the spot, sort of, and it's indirectly calling them out.
Yeah. So a question, you said you expect that they didn't read it. You think that expectation sets the stage for them not to then?
I wonder about that. Yeah, because
if you assume they're not going to read it, then your actions are going to be that, well, I'm assuming you didn't, so that's okay, and we'll put up with it. And
yeah,
if instead it's, hey, we're going to have 3 quick questions at the beginning of class that I'm going to ask somebody about the reading, and just set that as the expectation, do you think people might come prepared a little more?
Yeah, expectations are huge.
So next week, or not next week because you'll be on faculty leave, but the following week, we're going to start these sessions with 3 questions to you about the material you were supposed to read.
There you go.
How can we make readings more engaging though? Reading the textbook, is there a way to, and it's not that you can do it all the time, but is there a way to turn the reading into something tangible, so that they're doing something with it? I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, so, because there seems to just be a lot of resistance to reading the textbook. So how can we make that more inviting?
I've got a textbook I'm using right now for my case management class. That's an online class, but the text has questions embedded within it. So to proceed through the readings, you got to do that. I don't check on the students with that, but I'm wondering if there's ways I can do some kind of a pre-quiz or something to get them more engaged with it. I know that's almost more of a study guide kind of a way of doing it, but I know it helps me when I'm reading to have directed questions, and maybe I'm old school with the workbook kind of stuff, but it just seems to me, it's hard to pull out what we want them to get out of that. So I guess my rambling, I'm kind of coming back to study guides again. I don't know, but I think that is really part of it, is how do we get them engaged, or what can we do to make that reading something that's so dense we can make more understandable.
Chris, I was thinking about making, sorry, the dryer just went off. I was thinking about making my study guide more of a case study. So taking a patient and here's this patient who comes into the clinic, and can you describe what her, with this diagnosis, what are her main problems going to be? And
I love that.
Like, read this section of the textbook to answer this question, right? And I don't know if that would help, but maybe it would make it more real for them. Of, okay, and then this patient has this problem. How are you going to treat this? Read this section of the textbook to help you come up with some treatment options.
Yeah, I love that. Because when I'm talking to
one to demonstrate in class in our next meeting or something like that. I don't know.
What's interesting about that, Lane, and I think all of our nursing folks are over in the Division of Nursing meetings, so we're losing a lot of the nursing folks. Probably just lost 3 more there because all the nurses realized they were supposed to be in their meeting. Having that question up front and walking them through that challenge, our nursing folks are actually facing a new next gen NCLEX. And that next gen NCLEX has 15 different question styles that students are focusing. So try to name 15. Wow. True, false, multiple choice, essay, short answer. Okay, I got to 4. What other questions are there styled out there? Well, their whole drive is to make students think and work on case studies like that. So that's what I would expect to see from a lot of our folks as far as their board exams, is more of a critical thinking piece. So I love where you're going with that, Lane, is that's really going to be necessary going forward, I think, for all of our areas.
This is Lori. I have used an application or a website called Edpuzzle, which is not super user friendly, or at least I found that students have some trouble with navigating. It's just not super user friendly, and it can only be used with electronic resources. But it's basically a program where you upload a document that you want students to read, and then you insert questions that they have to answer as they're reading. But I have learned recently that there's a way to do it with Keynote that probably is a lot more user-friendly and probably can have a wider, you can use it with a wider variety of resources. But and it's not perfectly engaging, but it's more engaging than just assigning a chapter to read. So that's something I use a lot.
Sonia, what was the tool that Spencer used yesterday? Do you remember what that was? Something pack, something deck, maybe.
Air Deck.
Air Deck. There we go. Thank you.
It's a kind of a Google heavy product.
But that was kind of handy too. It's a lot like building. Think of Google Slides with Kahoot combined, kind of thing. So you can see the slides that are going through. So both Kahoot and that product would be great tools to kind of get there and see what we can do.
So I did that Pear Deck. It was somewhat engaging, but I couldn't move forward and backward with the slides, and I didn't like not having control and being able to see that. So just, it was good. It was interesting and it was different. I didn't like not having that control though, as a student.
Okay. Great. Yeah, where Keynote would give you that front and back and move through the way I want to. So all kinds of tools out there. So Pear Deck, there we go. Thank you, Sonia.
And then the other one that she mentioned, Ed Puzzle, is that a download for the iPad?
That'll work on really anything, and that's a free product as well.
Okay.
We'll pull that up and put that in so you can see where to find that too. Thank you. And you're right on top of things. Good work. So I saw Ashley ask, does anyone use flipped classroom strategies? How do you do it? Any thoughts there?
So I have tried many times, and somehow I always back up to the more traditional way. So I think when we are talking about preparing the students for the class and requiring some pre-reading, actually we are applying one of the elements of the flipped classroom, because the flipped classroom starts with some requirement for pre-reading for the class material, right? So my system or my method is always fair at the point when I start to check them or quiz them about their pre-reading. Many times they gave me a feedback that I was asking such a material what they haven't taught yet or haven't studied yet. So it's just a really, at least in my class, maybe I'm not doing something well, but it's just, again, it's different than science than for example, case studies or something. So, but certainly the first step is to do some pre-work for the class, for the flipped classroom, in the flipped classroom.
I've also found that giving them lectures to listen to before they come to class is more successful than having them read a book. And I always tell them, if you don't understand something, go to the book as a supplement. I don't give them the book to read, because when I did that in college, I didn't understand the book. There was way too many details and it wasn't helpful to me. So I give them these lectures beforehand, and then I do activities in class. Now, I'm not fully 100% there yet, but I'm building up my recorded lectures to get there. And so it's really makes the conversations a lot better, and it makes the time in class a lot more productive rather than sit there and talk and they listen, which is terrible for teaching.
Well, Seth, how are you making sure that they watch those videos before they come to class? Or how are you getting them to engage in that?
So I've just been telling them to do it. I haven't given them points or credit for it, but I've noticed that I can tell the difference when students have and haven't, and they don't always do it. So I haven't made it a point to make sure they do it, other than the examples of other students saying, oh, hey, I get that. That makes sense now because they watched it beforehand. And like having students say that out loud, like in front of their peers, I feel like is a good effect. Now, how do you do that? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but it's gotten to the point for me that I feel like my students recognize it and they know that it's beneficial, but it's not always, they still don't always do it. I mean, even if I gave them quizzes, I know Sophie Fong right now, she gives quizzes and students will still not take the quiz before coming to class. So there's always going to be some that don't. And I just haven't paid enough attention to see how many students are and how many students aren't.
Of the folks that I've seen do flipped classrooms, there's two groups, wildly successful and wildly failing. And what I have seen in it on both sides is the expectation that's there first. If the expectation is that you will have done the material and we're not going to stop to wait for you if you didn't, and you're pretty forgiving about it, flipped classroom's probably going to fail. If the expectation and the activity in class really drives you that you have to be ready, and that expectation is that you will be ready, people will come prepared.
I used to do a flipped classroom where I had students read before coming to class, and then I started doing videos as well. So they had a choice of whether they wanted to watch the content or read the content. And then I would do an individual quiz followed by a group quiz, the same quiz. Right? And it was interesting after I did that to get the students' feedback that they didn't feel like they needed to prepare because they could depend on their classmates who they knew would always be prepared. And so they got a low grade on the individual quiz, but then they got a high grade on the group quiz because they just depended on their classmates. So I felt like that was kind of a failure, a failed attempt at flipped classroom when I did it.
I feel the same way. I did group quizzes a little bit at the very beginning, and there were just certain students that like no preparation whatsoever and just relied on their other classmate.
Mhm.
And then it was hard because you were like, okay, well, how do we change this? And it was kind of hiding like that they weren't doing as well a little bit because their overall grade was better. So I just went, nope, you're individual.
Something else that helps a little bit too with the reading material and those types of things is to when you think about your study guides, maybe give the study guide as questions prior to class. These are the 3 questions I'm going to ask that you need to come prepared to answer in class. It gets them to kind of coaches them out of reading the entire material, but at least they start and you start to build that engagement because, okay, I know what 3 I need to come prepared for. And you can have that discussion about, if you really think about your learning outcomes before, what are the things you really want them to come away from this class with? Those are your 3 questions. Be prepared to discuss those, and off we go. And then call on them.
Right, and that goes back to my previous comment about decreasing the length of my pre-class assignments.
Yep.
So don't have 24
Mhm.
questions for them to do before class, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea. In the past, I tried to, especially as students got close to their end of their program of study, was to assign them like little like half-hour lectures to do. And the problem I ran into was they do theirs really good, that whole when you teach, you learn it really well. But then they wouldn't be absorbing from the other students as well because, they were new to teaching and how to get people involved. But I'm wondering if I combine that 3-question along with somebody else presenting, that might, get the flipped classroom and a little more excitement about that, but still making sure the key points were covered.
I go back to a faculty member that was really brutal to me when I was going through class. And he was the dean of the college as well as my boss at the time. And he was assigning 500 pages a night to read. And it was like, holy cow, how are we going to do this? And everybody knew that I had a good relationship with him. So they said, you're going to go talk to him and tell him he's assigning too much. Gee, thanks. Well, he enlightened me and said, yes, and life's going to be that way. You're going to have to filter all of this information and figure out what's important. But he said, I am giving you questions to guide the readings. And if you're not looking at the questions I'm asking and deciding what the relevant material is from the reading, you're wasting your time. He said, you can't read 500 pages a night and keep up. So you should be, the way your study habits should be is look at my 3 questions, decide which of the 15 articles I assigned are appropriate for those questions, and read those. Now you have 3 articles instead of 15 to read. Go. And it was a really huge life skill piece for me, because he pointed out to me that the best way to speed read is be able to decide what you need to read and what you don't. And so he was teaching us that way, but it was a hard lesson to learn, because like, holy cow, how do I get 500 pages a night and come ready for lecture? Well, I know what questions he's going to focus on, so I'm going to focus on that material. And
I've
I
also
think
found, oh,
go for it. Go ahead, Seth.
I've also found being more consistent with your teaching strategy and your methods is it makes it easier for the students to follow up with it. So if you're always doing that, it makes it easier. I'm consistently telling my students, okay, I have review material posted for you for our Monday class. And then Wednesday, you should go back, review what we have, and get ready for the activities so that you have that review time for the previous material that you should have gotten from your AP classes. And now you're integrating the new material for the pathology. So it makes it more consistent. They know what they're supposed to do when.
So is anybody noticing a trend on this? Backward design.
With clear
Knowing what your
activity.
learning outcomes are. What are the top things you want to do by the end of the course? What are the top things you want to do by the end of this class? And if your activities aren't focused on those, then Lane, like you were saying, instead of 24 things, maybe I need to have 3 things that we're going to focus heavily on to make sure they're getting those, but let's give them the other material too. But these are my outcomes. These are the 3 things I'm going to really focus on today in class. And I want people to come prepared on those.
That's a good segue, Mark, into our topic for next week, which is meaningful assessments beyond the test. Backwards design is a very important tool in that.
You were reading my mind. I was just going over to look what the next topic was and get that all ready. So you were right on top of it. Thank you. But I will correct one thing. If we do that next week, we're going to have a really small attendance. So 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about that. So what are the assessments? Yes. Thank you. Any other questions? Strategies? Frustrations?
It means you have to have everything ready weeks beforehand, and that's hard.
That's the hardest part of it. And especially when you're doing that first year where you really don't know exactly what, Ashley, you're shaking your head. I get it. That first year is just like, holy cow, what do I have to have? And I'm going to get it ready 15 minutes before I walk into class. But the piece I will coach you on after seeing so many teachers out there is leverage your students. If you can get them to create some of those teaching objects for you or those learning objects for you so that you can be ready for next year or next week. Hey, we're going to talk about this. Show me some examples of this. Tell me some questions about that. Leverage your students. They're going to learn far more teaching other students than they ever will listening to a lecture from you. I hate to say that, but teaching it is so much more powerful for students. So look for ways for them to engage that way and offload some of that work from you. And your students will learn it better from each other too. Believe it or not, they actually trust each other more than they do us sometimes.
Has anybody ever thought of having like a repository of student-made Quizlets I'm thinking specifically for the science classes. I mean, that's what I teach, so that's what I'm discussing. And I thought students are always asking about them, asking about things like that. And if we have a repository of some of the better ones known, of the ones that students make, maybe that would be beneficial to just link to in our Brightspace courses and say, hey, this is something that student made, use it as you want. It's not something I prepared, so I'm not guaranteeing its effectiveness, but giving it to them as a resource. I don't know, has anybody done that?
Seth, we've done that in the surgical technology class. They have a senior class that's a certification prep class, and they actually have an assignment where they get specific topics. Each student gets a specific topic, and they have to create 50 questions on that topic, and they have to share them with the whole class. So it's very specific. The students have strict guidelines where they can get their questions from. They have to provide the answers in a separate location so students can use that to study off of, to quiz themselves off of, and then all of the students get all of the topics covered. So it's been successful with our students. They enjoy it. Well, I don't know that they enjoy the actual doing the 50 questions, but it is beneficial to them afterwards.
Cool, that's helpful.
I'm actually looking to see if there's a institutional license for Quizlet. That would be interesting to see what we could do, kind of like we did for Kahoot, because it seems like that's an awful heavily used product for our students. So I'll dig into that a little bit and see if we can find a license for that, because that might be an interesting piece to have available for everybody. And like you said, leverage our students. Hey, you want a study guide? Go out here. Your fellow students have put together Quizlets that you can practice. But I like the disclaimer, Seth, of, hey, I didn't put it together, so you're at the whim of your fellow students.
And I don't know if we need an institutional license. You can use it as like flashcards without the license, and a lot of people sign up and use it for free that way. But it was just a thought that I had the other day that all these students are making them and remaking them each year. So why not harness that and make it available to others for future?
Part of why I was looking at it, maybe you can help me with this. Can the students do a search on NMC created flashcards? They would find only the ones from us? Or is it?
I don't know.
That was what I was kind of looking at, is if we did an institutional license, could they do a search and only see the flashcards created from our programs? Because like Kahoot, you can go in and you can get Kahoots just from NMC, or you can get Kahoots from all over the world. It might be interesting if we could get just Quizlet pieces from our programs. But have a little more. Go ahead.
I don't know that we would need to pay for a license or something like that in order to have that. You could create a repository just of the links or the usernames and the names of the quizzes and have it that way. I mean, of course, an institutional license would be good and would be nice for things that it brings, but I don't know if it's necessary like it is with the Kahoots, because the Kahoots give you so much more access to different items.
All right. Well, you and I can talk further at our meetings and just kind of dig into that a little bit and see what the right solution is. It might be that we just build a big discussion board in Brightspace where students could put their links. And we could put different classes in there as modules, and the student can put their links in and turn it in as a discussion. Here's my set of flashcards I built in Quizlet for this class. Lots of creative ways that we could start to put that together. Awesome. All right. Well, I hear it's a beautiful day outside. I've been in this Create Lab with no windows all day. So I'm not sure, but I hear it's a beautiful day. So let's give you a few minutes back, and we know that we've got the follow on to this class in yeah, Lane's pointing over his shoulder. Rub it in, Lane. It looks wonderful out there. So take your next week off and enjoy. And Ava, if I remember right, you've got the book next after the following week. So just make it stick book. Is that right? Or Chris does. Chris, that's right.
Yeah, please.
Chris.
Please.
Looking at Chris and saying Ava for some reason. So yeah, very good.
I can be the next. I can
Yep.
be the next one after
All
Chris.
right, very good.
Oh,
I'll make sure I get it to you then, Eva.
All right.
All right, Ava,
Pass
enough
it
for me.
around.
And you have to come to IT and give it to me.
Okay, so Chris, you're gonna give it to Ava. Ava, you're gonna give it to Lane. Awesome.
That's a
All
deal.
right. Well, thanks everybody. You have a great weekend and a great break. You all deserve it, more than a week break. So tell Amy, Mark told you take 3.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you,
Thanks a
everybody.
bunch.
Have a
Thanks,
great
guys.
one. See you soon.